everyone, and welcome to History and Contemporary Psychology. Within this PowerPoint, I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible because I couldn't possibly cover all the history of psychology, even though it is a relatively young science beginning like 1880s. But we are going to talk a bit about the history and different paradigms and perspectives. Now, these are important because the paradigms and perspectives are going to give you clues to different theories we're going to talk about in the future. So it's important that we learn these paradigms and perspectives because they have core principles that unite them. And so when we talk about psychodynamic approach, cognitive approach, Gestalt approach, all these different approaches have different characteristics. It's important to understand them and view them as a lens through which we can view other theories. I will give you examples of this as we progress with our studies, but what we're going to do is we're going to understand the importance of Wilhelm Wundt and William James in the development of psychology. Very important figures. Appreciate Freud's influence. Understand the basic tenets of Gestalt psychology, which we don't really talk about that much in the semester, so I'm not going to emphasize that too much. Appreciate the important role that behaviorism played in psychology's history. Understand basic tenets of humanism. Understand how cognitive revolution shifted psychology's focus back to the mind. And then I'm going to cover things like a little bit of feminist psychology, multicultural psychology, Hispanic and Latinx influences in psychology, and things of those sort. So let's get started. Structuralism. So Wilhelm Wundt was like the first psychologist. He was the first one to have a psychology lab in, where was it? It was in Germany. Leipzig? Something like that. Don't quote me on that. But Wilhelm Wundt was very focused on understanding the structures of the mind, thus the name structuralism. So he wanted to look at those components of consciousness, so our experience of what we're thinking of, what we're paying attention to, what we're analyzing, and how those components combine to result in our experiences. And so he used a method that was very famous at the time because it's something kind of new. He would train his lab partners and his students in introspection. So when you say introspection, it's kind of looking inward, right? Think of that intro, very reflective component. And so with introspection, he asked that his students were trained to ask themselves specific questions to examine their own consciousness. Now, this is really interesting in theory because if I asked you all to understand the experience of an apple, look at this apple and tell me what it is. You might say things about the color, the smell, the taste, or the taste you remember, right? But introspection is subjective. It varies from person to person, so it's not exactly the most reliable method. But it was interesting kind of to kickstart this idea of examining consciousness in psychology. And so structuralism is that attempt to understand the structure or characteristics of the mind, specifically consciousness. So we're focusing on those different parts and how they come together to create an experience. And we analyze that by analyzing our own experiences, according to Wundt. Now, William James kind of followed Wundt's structuralism with functionalism, looking at the function. So it was like, cool, that's a great idea, Wundt, about, our understanding of the different structures of the mind and how they come together. But what is their purpose? What is their function? Like, what purpose do they serve for us? And so William James is very much inspired by the works of Darwin, which, as you may or may not know, he was an evolutionary scientist, and he studied the theory of evolution and those different traits and how beneficial traits get passed on, and survival of the fittest, if that jogs some of your memory. And so it kind of blends to William James. What function does the mind have, or the purpose it has? How does it benefit and help an organism fit and adapt to their environment? Because humans are animals. So what do their behaviors and thoughts and emotions, how does that benefit them? So we're looking at their function. So according to James, psychology's purpose was to study the function of behavior in the world. So we're looking at the whole mind, so not just that consciousness. We're looking at the whole mind and how it helps a human being function in the world. William James was also the first American psychologist. So I should put that in there. So in comparison to Wundt, James tried to be more objective in his research. So meaning trying to strip away those personal experiences directly, kind of like that introspection. But James also was very much a pragmatist. I can never say this word. He was very much about, well, we should research these things in psychology. It's interesting to study the behavior. But also, if it works for someone, it works for someone. That's kind of a pragmatic approach. Like, does it work? Then do we need to understand why it works, or can it just work and be beneficial to people? So sometimes he had sort of that approach as well. But he was the first American psychology, and he did kind of combat Wundt's structuralism with understanding the function, getting to that deeper meaning of our behavior. Then we have Freud. Okay, Sigmund Freud. This is like the name you know, even if you don't know psychology. He is the founding kind of person, the figure of psychoanalytic theory. Psychoanalytic theory, specifically Sigmund Freud, developed out of this idea that we have different levels of consciousness, and we have an unconscious mind that has hidden feelings and urges outside of our awareness, and our early childhood experiences also affect this. Early childhood experiences are a big part of the psychoanalytic approach, examining how those experiences affect us in adulthood, for example. So this unconscious mind is basically like this little monster who thinks about sex and aggression, and it affects our behaviors, according to Freud. Excuse me, I hiccuped. So we must bring, according to Freud, we have to bring those unconscious motives of that little monster in our unconscious mind into consciousness so that we can understand them, and that'll help our behavior or cure any psychoses we have. So Freud has different methods we're going to talk about throughout the semester. Dream analysis. I included a fun article about dream analysis. This was the idea that your dreams have meaning. This is a very Freudian approach. Whereas research now doesn't necessarily, I don't want to say doesn't necessarily support that, like the hidden symbols kind of prophetic type of dream. It's not really supported. It's more like your brain is half awake, half asleep, sending signals and making funny stories out of things that have happened to you or things you're thinking about. We're going to learn about that with consciousness. Free association, so you just let the client speak and make associations with words, and you're hoping something will come up. Like you have them do word associations. If I say bad, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Bad. Good. Sex. Bird, right? They have the person make associations, and hopefully it'll tell something about their unconscious. And these are still methods used today, although they don't have high empirical support. The reliability is kind of low because it can vary based on your psychologist. One person may say your dream about tripping over a garden hose is one thing, and another psychologist may say it's another. So it's not good reliability. It's not consistent. And then we have ideas of slips of the tongue where you misspeak and people go, oh, like you meant that when you really said something. Or the joke is when you say one thing and mean your mother. I don't know if any of you heard that. I think it's funny. But slips of the tongue, they really don't have any hidden meaning. It's just sometimes lack of attention, lack of energy that can affect that. But they're also called Freudian slips. So I've included a funny video of different Freudian slips. I think that it's a political compilation of like, excuse me, I keep sneezing in my videos. A political compilation of like all these slips of the tongue. So it's pretty even on all sides, you know, if you're concerned about me being partial, but it's pretty funny. And this idea of psychoanalytic theory just dominated early clinical psychology. It was interesting. Freud was talking about sex in the 40s, 30s, and 40s in a time where it was like so cliche to talk about sex and how sex affects how you develop as a person, and saying everyone wants to have sex or be with their mom. And, you know, girls want to have sex or be with their dad, so they find someone like their dad. It's a whole Freudian thing. But that's why it was so popular, because it was like, oh, clutching their pearls type of thing. But it dominated early clinical psychology, and some of those adaptive methods are popular today. Anna Freud, his daughter, kind of proliferated his ideas, but I would say she refined them to be less to have more of like a solid background. She didn't focus so much. Neo-Freudians like Erikson, Jung, and Freud's daughter, they didn't focus so much on the sex aspect, but they did focus on like social interactions, early childhood experiences. So looking at a breadth of experiences and that can affect your unconscious mind. Really interesting. Again, the unconscious mind is a hard topic to study, so there's not much empirical support for some of Freud's ideas, because how are you supposed to study something that we don't know is even there, right? We don't know about this unconscious mind. We don't know how to measure it. Gestalt psychology Gestalt means whole. This was popular in Germany at the time that like psychodynamic approach was coming up, so it didn't really kick off the ground as much. It didn't get a lot of funding, so it kind of died in America, which is unfortunate, or the United States, I should be specific, because psychodynamic approach was all the rage. But this was a lot to do with sensory experiences. So how do our sensory experiences get broken down into individual parts? So we think of a symphony or a song, right? If you're listening to, what's a popular song right now? I don't know. If you're listening to, that's not appropriate. I don't know, some kind of song that you like. You have lyrics, you have a beat, you have a melody, you have rhyming. You have all these components that come together to make a song. So Gestalt psychology is kind of the same. It's like what components come together to make this sensory experience of experiencing a song. Think of this picture, right? What do you see in this picture? Some of you may say 2 triangles. Some of you may say circles. Some of you may say little Pac-Men, right? These are not triangles. They are different parts that are kind of lined up for a triangle. So our brain is kind of filling in the picture. And let me expand on this a little more by showing you the images here. Right? What is this first image? Maybe some of us say it's a vase. Some of us say it's 2 faces facing one another. That's the idea of Gestalt psychology. What are we seeing? What are we experiencing? And why do we experience? I know some people who can't see both image in these. The second picture, what is this? Some people may say a tree with some birds flying away. Some people may say, oh, look, it's a gorilla and a lioness staring at each other. And then we have the last image. Some people say it's a saxophone player. You know, there's his nose and the saxophone. Maybe that's like a music note. And some people may say, hey, it looks like a woman. There's 2 eyes, a nose, a lips. I had someone say one time it was Taylor Swift, and I cannot unsee it. But that's the idea of Gestalt psychology. How do we take these pieces and come together to form that whole? Now, behaviorism. Behaviorism is personally one of my favorites. That's kind of why we spend 2 weeks on it later in the semester. But it's this idea, it was a push to develop psychology as a hard science. Like, we need to be objective with our experiments. We can't measure things that are in the mind because it's going to be subjective. We can only measure behavior because we can see it. Right? That's very radical behaviorism. It's changed since then. But some prominent, in order to do that, they did want, these psychologists, and Ivan Pavlov, who was a physiologist, wanted to focus on the behavioral, just what we could observe with people. So it was a push to make psychology more reputable as a science. So we have Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. They all did prominent things within this field, and their names we're going to hear repeatedly. But Pavlov, he conditioned a reflex, or classical conditioning, with a dog salivation study. He was testing how dogs salivated, and he would ring a bell and bring them food, and measure how much, he surgically implanted a tube in their mouth, and measure how much saliva they would produce when they saw the food. Well, after a while, he saw that he would ring the bell, and the dogs would start salivating before even seeing the food. And so he was like, why is that? They're salivating before they even see the food. And that's where we get this idea of associative learning. So how we learn through associations. You know, maybe you have a certain smell that triggers a memory, right? That's associative learning. Watson looked at different observable behaviors. He also said the study of consciousness was flawed. Watson and Skinner were a little bit more radical in their idea of behaviorism. Watson wanted to observe and control behavior. He did a lot of animal studies, and he was actually banned from the field of psychology and later went into marketing. He was the one who did this notorious study where he scared the crap out of a small baby, little Albert, and through associative learning. And then I just think it's funny because after he was banished from psychology, he went to marketing. So that's why we're going to pick apart commercial ads later in the semester to look at the psychological principles at play, because marketing does use these principles thanks to Watson. Not entirely, but in large part. And so he did a lot of animal studies. And then we have Skinner, who's known for his Skinner box and teaching pigeons and rats how to read. But really it's learning through consequences of behavior. So we're going to talk more about that, but reinforcement and punishment. So how do we keep a behavior going? Maybe I give you a sticker each time you get an A. That's reinforcement. Maybe to punish you, I give you an extra assignment because y'all didn't attend class the other day. That's punishment. These are all principles that have come from B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was highly influential in terms of academia and modeling and shaping children's behaviors. I'm going to pause this video here and continue with a part 2.